I'm going to be demonstrating how I dyed nylon for the water in the rug that I did for the class. The nylon needs to be soaked, but it does not need to be soaked as long as you would wool, because it takes up the water right away. So we soaked the nylon. I've got teal dye dissolved in hot water. I have added a little vinegar to my water bath because I want to get a gradation of colors here, and if the vinegar is already in, it will take up the dye quicker and more complete, and then I can go on to the next set. So I'm going to add some dye in the back here, and then with my chopstick I'm going to move my nylon around. You can see it starts taking up the dye right away. But I can tell already that this is not going to be as dark as I want my darkest value. So I'll add a little more. And still, it is not as dark as I like it. Dyeing nylon is very much like dyeing wool, in that you use the same dyes, the same procedure. It's just the nylon will take up the dye faster than the wool will. So that is getting sort of dark enough. What I'm going to do is I want it just a tad darker, and I'm going to dip my skewer in some dry dye and put it in. And you can use this dry skewer and dye as a way of getting closer to what you're aiming for. Just a little more, I think. Okay, so that's pretty much where I want it. There's still some dye left in the dye bath, so I'm going to pull this dye down toward the back, and I'm going to add 3 more strips of wet nylon back in the back here, and it will start taking up any of the dye that has been left over from the first batch, but there's not near enough, as we can tell, because we want it to be a lighter shade than the first, but not too light. So we'll go through the same process of adding and stirring. And working with it until we get it where we would like it. And also, just like wool, it will look a little darker when it's wet than when dried, but I don't think that the contrast is quite as evident or as much as with the wool. I want to be careful to add enough to darken it, but not to make it as dark as what is in the first batch. We can pull it down, and we can see that there is a gradation there. Maybe just a little more. Maybe this time I'll do the skewer and the chopstick to add it. And it was quite a bit, so I'm going to pull it out of the way. And I will add 2 more pieces of nylon to the back. Hopefully take up some of this extra dye that I have. And I don't think I'm going to need to add very much more because I want to see that difference. Then at the very end, I'm going to add 1 more piece of nylon and no more dye. And this will take a little bit, this will take up the slight amount of dye that is left. And this is what I used for the edges of the icebergs that were floating to give the indication that they were under the water. And I don't want that to get too much lighter or darker, so I'm going to take it out of the dye for now. And I'm going to let the rest of this cook in the pan for 20 to 30 minutes. Then we will let it cool, we'll rinse it well, and we'll dry it in the dryer. And I have prepared 2 other batches today, and this is an example of what you can get from dyeing the nylon. You can see the 2 different batches came out slightly different, but they both have a gradation of color. So, good luck in your trying to dye nylon.